Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The candlelight flickered softly in the grand hall of the temple, casting long shadows on the marble wall. Alice knelt at the altar, hands clasped in prayer, her lips moving silently as she spoke to the god. The air was thick with incense, a heady mixture of sandalwood and myrrh. Her heart beat steadily, though there was a weight pressing down on her chest, something she couldn't quite shake. Her faith had always been unwavering, but tonight felt different, like a storm brewing in the distance. As her eyes closed, the vision struck like lightning. Suddenly she was no longer in the temple, but standing on the edge of a vast cliff overlooking a valley bathed in golden light. In the center of the valley, a radiant cup floated in the air, its surface shimmering with a glow that felt both welcoming and dangerous. The Holy Grail, a voice deep and echoing, reverberated through her soul. Tara, Alice, you are chosen. Tara's her breath caught in her throat. You're chosen, dearie, she whispered. The Holy Grail must be protected. Darkness seeks to claim its power. You are its guardian. Before she could respond, the light faded, and she was back in the temple, gasping for air. Her hands trembled as they unclasped it, and the weight on her chest now felt like a mantle of responsibility she hadn't asked for. The Grail, she had heard of its legends, the stories passed down through the generations, the cup that held unimaginable power, capable of balancing the world's order. But why her? She was just a young priestess, untested, unworthy of such a task. Alice stood, steadying herself on the altar as she whispered, Sarah, what do I do? The answer came, not from the gods, but from within. She had to find allies, those who could help her on this journey. The Grail was not something she could protect alone. Evil forces were already moving, seeking to claim it. Time was short. The next morning, Alice stood at the temple gates, her simple white robes catching the early morning breeze. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the cobblestone streets of the city. She clutched a small satchel, her only belongings for the journey ahead. The Grail was hidden in a place few knew, and even fewer could reach. The gods had given her a glimpse, but no clear directions. She would need help, and there was only one place to find it: the Mercenaries' Guild. As she made her way through the city, Alice's mind raced. She had heard stories of Canaan, a warrior with a reputation as fierce as the storms that raged in the northern mountains. They said he had once been a knight loyal to a kingdom long since fallen. Now he worked as a mercenary, fighting for coin rather than honor. But he was strong, and she would need his strength if she were to succeed. The underground fighting ring reeked of sweat and blood. Alice hesitated at the entrance, the sounds of fists hitting flesh and the roar of the crowd echoing down the narrow stairwell. This was a world far removed from the peaceful temple she had known her whole life, but she pressed forward, descending into the chaos below. Cain was easy to spot. His towering frame and battle-scarred armor set him apart from the other fighters. He stood in the center of the ring, his sword drawn, facing off against a hulking brute twice his size. The fight was over in moments. Caden moved with a lethal precision, dodging the man's wild swings before delivering a swift blow that sent the giant crashing to the ground. The crowd roared, but Caden barely acknowledged them as he wiped the blood from his blade. He turned, his eyes locking with Alice across the ring. There was no recognition in his gaze, only cold detachment. She swallowed hard and stepped forward. Cain, she called out, her voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. I need your help. Cain unsheathed his sword and approached her, his expression unreadable. You've got the wrong man, priestess. I don't work for free. It's not gold I am offering, Alice replied, her chin lifting slightly. It's redemption. Cain, as eyes narrowed, redemption? From what to? The Holy Grail? For a moment, something flickered in Cain's eyes. Interest, perhaps, or recognition of the weight those words carried. But he said nothing, simply gesturing for her to follow him. The next to join their group was Lena, a thief, with a reputation as quick with her blade as she was with her wit. They found her in the crowded marketplace, pulling off a heist, so brazen, it left the guards spinning in confusion. Lena had always operated in the gray spaces of morality, taking what she wanted and disappearing into the shadows before anyone knew she was there. But when Alice approached her with the offer of a greater prize than mere gold, Lena couldn't resist. The Holy Grail, huh? Lena grinned, flipping a coin between her fingers. You must be desperate if you're returning to people like me. Desperate. Alice raised an eyebrow. number, just pragmatic. We all have our roles to play. Lena's grin widened.
Well, if it's adventure.
You reoffer and count me in. Besides, I've always been curious about that cup. Oscar, the last member of their group, was found in a tower of crumbling stone on the outskirts of the city. He was an older man, his robes worn and faded, but his eyes gleamed with knowledge and a power that had not yet dimmed with age. Oscar was a wizard, one of the few who still remembered the old magic, and his knowledge of the Grail was unmatched. You know why you were here? Oscar said the moment Alice entered his study. He didn't look up from the ancient tome he was reading, the pages yellowed with age. Then you know we don't have time to waste, Harry, Alice replied, her voice firm. Oscar finally lifted his gaze, a small smile playing at the corners of his lip. Indeed, the forces seeking the Grail are already on the move. We'll need to be quicker. The journey was long and treacherous, taking them through enchanted forests where the trees whispered secrets and over mountains where the wind howled like a living creature. At every turn, they were hunted by shadowy figures, soldiers of the Dark Sorcerer, Lord Varian, who sought the Grail set power to reshape the world in his image. It was during one such ambush that the group's first test came. They had made camp in a small clearing when the attack began. The soldiers emerged from the shadows, their armor black as night, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. Cannon was the first to react, drawing his sword and charging into battle without hesitation. Lena was close behind, her daggers flashing in the moonlight as she danced around their attackers, her movements fluid and precise. But it was Alice who surprised them all. As the fight raged around her, she closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, calling on the gods for strength. A soft light began to emanate from her hands, and with a whispered prayer, she unleashed a wave of divine energy that sent the soldiers staggering back. The battle was over in moments, the soldiers retreating into the shadows as quickly as they had come. But the victory was hollow, for Alice knew they were just the beginning. As they tended to their wounds, Caton approached her, his expression unreadable. Sir, you are stronger than you look. Priestess. Alice met his gaze, her voice steady. I'll need to be if we were going to stop Varian. Caden gave a small nod of approval before turning away. The group was starting to come together, but Alice knew that the real challenges lay ahead. The Temple of the Ancient Gods was the next destination on their journey, a place where they hoped to find answers. The temple was hidden deep within the mountains, a labyrinth of stone and magic that few had ever entered, and even fewer had returned from. The legends spoke of trials within its walls, tests designed to break even the strongest of heart. Alice led the way, her faith guiding her through the twisting corridor. The walls were carved with symbols of old, telling the stories of gods and men, of the balance between light and dark. It was a reminder of the stakes they were playing for. The first trial came in the form of riddles, spoken by a disembodied voice that echoed through the hall. Each question tested their knowledge, their wit, and their ability to work together. Kanan's strength and Lena's quick thinking proved invaluable, but it was Oscar Sad's knowledge that ultimately guided them through the trial. The second trial was far more harrowing. As they entered the next chamber, the temperature dropped suddenly, and the walls around them shimmered with strange ethereal light. In the center of the room stood a massive stone golem, its eyes glowing, a deep red. Without warning, it lunged toward them, its enormous fists smashing the ground where they had been standing, just moments before. Kane was the first to react, swinging his sword in a wide arc to draw the creature, send attention. The golem's stone arm crashed down again, but Caden sidestepped the blow with a warrior side grace, countering with a powerful strike to the creature's side flank. The sound of steel clanging against rock echoed through the chamber, but the golem barely flinched. It's ancient magic, far stronger than anything we very face. Lena darted around the golem looking for a weak spot. Her daggers were quick, but against solid stone, they did little more than chip away at the surface. Frustration crept into her movements as she dodged the creature-assigned attacks, each swing of its arms leaving cracks in the floor. Alice, watching the battle unfold, realized the futility of their effort. This wasn't a test of strength. The golem was a guardian bound by magic older than any of them. Fighting it would only delay them, perhaps even cost them their lives. She closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, calling on the gods once more. The divine light returned to her hands, but this time she focused it on the golem's core, its heart, where the magic that powered it must reside. Hold it off for a little longer, she said, her voice calm but commanding. I'll find a way to stop it. Caden grunted in acknowledgement, redoubling his efforts to keep the golem's attention. Lena and Oscar moved in tandem, distracting the creature just long enough for Alice to complete her prayer. With a final whispered word, she unleashed the light in a concentrated burst, striking the golem's core directly. The effect was immediate. The golem froze in place, its glowing eyes dimming as the magic that had animated it dissipated. Slowly, its massive body crumbled into dust, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Alice let out a shaky breath, her body trembling from the effort. She could feel the divine power fading from her, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. But there was no time to rest. They had passed the second trial, but the final one awaited them, and with it, the key to finding the Holy Grail. As they moved deeper into the temple, the air grew heavier, the weight of ancient magic pressing down on them. The final chamber was vast, its walls lined with statues of long-forgotten gods, their expressions stern and unforgiving. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it a golden chalice, the Grail itself. But they were not alone. Standing before the Grail, his hands raised in a ritualistic gesture, was Lord Varian. His dark robes billowed around him, and his eyes gleamed with the promise of power. He turned to face them, a cruel smile curling on his lip. "So you've made it this far," Varian said, his voice dripping with mockery. "I must admit I am impressed, but you read too late. The Grail sense power will soon be mine." Catan stepped forward, his sword raised, but Varian merely waved a hand, sending a wave of dark energy crashing into him. Tyson was thrown back, slamming into the wall with a sickening thud. "Enchanted, get up." Lena moved next, her daggers flashing as she lunged at Varian, but he was too quick. With a flick of his wrist, he sent her tumbling to the ground, a gash appearing on her side where his magic had cut through her defenses. Oscar, his face grim, began chanting an incantation, but Varian turned his attention to the wizard, cutting him off mid-spell with a burst of dark energy that knocked him to the ground. Alice was the last one standing, her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she felt the familiar stirrings of doubt. Could she truly stop him? She'd barely survived the trials, and now with her companions wounded and Varian standing before her, radiating power, the odds seemed impossible. But then she remembered why she was here. The gods had chosen her, not because she was the strongest or the most skilled, but because of her faith. The Holy Grail was a symbol of balance of the world's cess order, and it was her duty to protect that order no matter the cost. Drawing on the last of her strength, Alice stepped forward, her hands glowing once more with divine light. Varian laughed, a low mocking sound, but Alice didn't waver. "The Grail is not yours to take," she said, her voice steady. Varian's smile faltered. "And who will stop me?" Alice didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her hands and the light within her grew brighter, illuminating the entire chamber. The statues of the gods seemed to watch, their stone faces impassive, as the power of the Grail began to pulse in time with Alice's heartbeat. Varian's expression twisted into one of fury. He hurled another wave of dark magic at her, but this time, it didn't reach. The divine light surrounding Alice absorbed the blow, growing stronger with each passing second. She could feel the gods guiding her, their power flowing through her as she took another step toward the Grail. With a final burst of energy, Alice unleashed the full force of her magic. The light enveloped Varian, and for a moment, he screamed a sound of pure rage and despair. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Varian collapsed to the ground, his body lifeless, the dark magic that had sustained him dissipating into the air. The room was silent once more. Alice stood before the Grail, her hands still glowing faintly, though the light was beginning to fade. She could feel the exhaustion creeping in again, but there was a sense of peace now, a quiet assurance that the worst was over. She turned to her companions. Titan had struggled to his feet, his face bruised, but determined. Lena was sitting up, pressing a hand to her wounded side, but she managed a weak smile. Oscar was already on his feet, dusting off his robes and giving Alice a nod of approval. "You did it," Cannon said, his voice rough but filled with admiration. Alice shook her head. "We did it, all of us." As they left the temple, the sun was rising on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the mountain. The world felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the balance had been restored. Alice knew that her journey was far from over as the guardian of the Holy Grail. Her duty would continue. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, her heart filled with gratitude for the companions who had stood by her side and for the gods who had given her the strength to protect the world. The Grail was safe, and with it, the promise of a new dawn.